Well, good morning and welcome to our next webinar in our series of Meet the Experts. Joining me today is Lisa Walker, Head of Market Regulation at IPSX. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning.
So we're going to be discussing the role of the approved valuer and as part of the process of securities being admitted to trading on IPSX, as well as looking at the ongoing obligations post-IPO. But before we get started, may I just point out that you can pose questions to Lisa at any point by using the text box which appears at the bottom of your screens. Now, you may just need to move your mouse to activate this, but it will appear. We'll take all the questions at the end after we've heard from Lisa, which should be in around about 20 minutes time or so. The webinar will then be posted up to our resources section at ipsx.com, where of course you can listen to it and to all our other podcasts and webinars. So let's get started. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for listening in today to the session. Today's session is about the approved valuer. So the slide in front of you depicts the whole of what we call the IPSX community. It includes the formal members such as IPSX approved valuers, as well as the wider community. So on the slide, the formal members are set out in the boxes with the dotted outlines around them. And those members are, if you like, the members that IPSX formally approves, and those members which IPSX has formal regulatory oversight of. The IPSX valuers, among the other formal members, will work alongside other advisory firms, and they will be providing complementary services and may also liaise with the issuer and the lead advisor, as well as other service providers as part of an IPO or the ongoing relationship. So as I mentioned today, I intend to talk specifically about the role of the approved valuer. So the valuer has two roles in the process of supporting an issuer. One is the initial process, and then the second is the ongoing relationship that a valuer will have with an issuer. So talking about the initial phase, an IPSX approved valuer is responsible for preparing a red book valuation under instruction from the issuer or the initial asset owner, depending on what stage the valuations are undertaken. So typically, an asset owner will identify an asset or assets that they would like to bring to the public market. The asset will be transferred to a separate legal entity if one doesn't exist already, and this entity then becomes the issuer. So the valuation, which forms part of the prospectus and the admission particulars, is undertaken for the benefit of the issuer. In some cases, the instruction to conduct a valuation occurs before the asset is transferred to the separate legal entity. In this case, the valuation instruction is likely to come from the original asset owner, but it will still be done for the benefit of the issuer. Now, in addition to meeting the issuer's requirements, all valuations must be in compliance with RICS Red Book valuation standards and practices. So IPSX has chosen to lean on the already established arrangements for valuation services, firstly by relying on the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, or RICS, accreditation and supervision framework for firms and individuals providing the valuation services. And in addition, IPSX is relying on the RICS Red Book valuation standards to ensure that valuations are in accordance with accepted market practice. In addition, IPSX is a MiFID regulated market, so issuers are subject to the prospectus regime, and issuers must have their prospectus approved by the FCA. The FCA's prospectus regime requires issuers to produce a valuation as part of the prospectus, which is also in compliance with RICS standards. So IPSX's and the FCA standards in this respect are aligned. The valuation, once produced as part of the IPO, must be submitted simultaneously to the FCA and to IPSX for formal review. And as I mentioned, there are ongoing obligations or an ongoing role for approved valuers as part of the life cycle of an issuer. So once an issuer is admitted to market, it has a requirement to obtain 6 monthly valuations and to publish the executive summary of these valuations. Again, these valuations are subject to the RICS standards and the specific requirements that we've set out in the IPSX rules for issuers. So what rules apply to the IPSX approved valuer? Firstly, the IPSX rules for members. The main rules applicable to an IPSX approved valuer are parts 1 and 3 of the 5-part IPSX rules for members. Part 1 sets out 6 broad principles, 5 of which apply to all members, including valuations. And these include requirements to act with due skill, care and diligence, to act with integrity, to ensure proper standards of market conduct, to act in compliance with your regulatory obligations, and to act in an open and cooperative manner. Part 3 of the rules for members are specific to the IPSX approved valuers. And that part of the rules sets out the specific obligations for approved valuers, including the context of the role, the eligibility criteria, the continuing obligations, and the role of IPSX supervision. So in a very broad sense, the eligibility criteria require an approved valuer to be a corporate entity or a partnership, to demonstrate competence to provide valuation services, including having an adequate number of employees who are on the RICS registered valuation scheme. An approved valuer must also have appropriate systems and controls in place to carry out one's role in accordance with the IPSX rules. So I mentioned in passing that IPSX issuers are required under the IPSX rules for issuers to produce an initial valuation as well as a 6-monthly valuation. By extension, an IPSX approved valuer must be familiar with the IPSX rules for issuers as they apply to the preparation of valuations, because they must ensure an issuer is able to comply with these rules which are relevant to the valuation. In particular, Schedule 2 of the rules for issuers contain prescribed information on the Red Book that the Red Book compliant valuations must contain. And this is set out on the next slide. So Schedule 2 of the IPSX rules for issuers sets out what we require in the Red Book valuation. It's worth spending some time going into the detail of what we're specifically requiring. First and foremost, the valuation must be compliant with the RICS Red Book. This is both a requirement of RICS for any valuation that an RICS approved valuer produces, and for any valuation undertaken as part of a prospectus, which is, as I mentioned, required to be reviewed and approved by the FCA or another EEA National Competent Authority where relevant. So supplementing the basic requirement to be Red Book compliant, IPSX has set out further specific requirements. When these disclosures are included in a Red Book valuation, they must also be provided in accordance with RICS standards. So these are 4 factors or 4 points. The first is the basis for valuations. They must be prepared in accordance with the Red Book and are as follows: market rent, market value under the special assumption of vacant possession, special assumptions related to any projected values, and 5th is insurance reinstatement costs. All measurements contained within the Red Book must be in accordance with accepted market practice, which should either be the International Property Measurement Standards or the RICS Code of Measuring Practice 6th edition. The second requirement that we specifically ask for is a SWOT analysis. And this should capture the key factors included in the valuation that could impact on future valuations, including the impact of internal or external factors, which could impact the value of the physical assets, further development, or the income. The third factor that we require is a responsibility statement to be given by the IPSX approved valuer. This is to confirm that the valuer has complied with the current edition of the RICS valuation, Global Standards and UK National Supplement as appropriate, the RICS Global Professional and Ethical Standards, the RICS Professional Standards and Guidance, and the global conflicts of interest and any other guidance from RICS around conflicts of interest for the specific market. And the fourth element to be included is a statement of covenant strength. And I go on to talk about that in more detail on this slide. So the intent of these additional prescribed elements of the valuation are to ensure that investors are given the right levels of transparency and disclosure to inform their investment decisions. Whilst there is, of course, the potential for capital growth, because IPSX is targeting issuers with more stable institutional grade assets, the value derived from the investment will be focused more on a reliable income stream, which comes about through the effective management of the underlying property assets. The greater level of transparency that we are requiring around the covenant strength will give investors more information to understand any emerging risks around the strength of the future rental income and, by extension, the management of the asset. This will also enable them to more effectively exercise their rights to shareholder engagement. So, for example, investors will be able to see over time whether the risk profile of tenants is changing and how effectively the senior management are managing the asset to deliver the shareholder returns by securing that future income. These levels of transparency around the statement of covenant strength are higher than you'll see on other exchanges. And the reason for this is to give investors in IPSX securities more comfort around the performance of their investments. With the levels of disclosure set out in this statement of covenant strength, our aim has been to balance the rights of investors to information against potentially putting landlords and tenants at a commercial disadvantage through appropriate levels of disclosure. And we're comfortable that we've struck the balance here to meet both of those objectives. So how does one become an approved valuer? The process for becoming an IPSX approved valuer is straightforward. The application form is on our website along with other membership application forms, and the market regulation team is very happy to help any applicant as they work through the application process. Other materials that the applicant will want to refer to are also on the IPSX website, including the IPSX rules and the IPSX admission agreement. So these are set out in a separate tab which is entitled Rules and Guidance. The IPSX admission agreement sets out the terms and conditions which apply to members, including approved valuers. So how do you go about choosing an IPSX approved valuer? There's a list on our website of our members under the member directory, and there's a hyperlink on your screen to show you where to go. Currently, we have 4 approved valuers as part of our membership, and these are set out on the slide. And we also have very active conversations with other RICS members who are looking to join imminently. So as part of our wider membership, the list of members continues to grow, and so feel free to check our member directory to see the most up-to-date list of members. Alternatively, if you go to the website and you have a particular RICS member in mind that isn't currently listed, it is also possible for them to reach out to us and discuss their eligibility for membership, and the market regulation team would be very happy to have those conversations. And the contact details for our team are set out on our website. So those are the key points that I wanted to cover in terms of the role of an IPSX approved valuer. Thank you very much for listening. Kevin?
Great. Thank you, Lisa. That was very informative, and thank you for taking us through what is clearly an important um, process, and indeed is important in terms of the functioning of the exchange and getting issuers ready for their IPO. Now, we have had some questions that have come in over the last sort of 10 or 15 minutes or so. So let's take those. And again, if any colleagues on the phone or on the webinar want to put a question forward, please do so by using the text box which appears at the bottom of your screen, so we can pick those up. But let's get started with those that have come in so far. So the first question, Lisa, that we have this morning is, at what point, when should a prospective issuer think about appointing a valuer?
It's a good question. So our rules anticipate that an approved valuer is appointed at a fairly early stage in the process because the valuation forms part of the prospectus. And so in order to apply for eligibility, the prospectus has to be vetted and approved by the FCA. So we'd expect the conversations with the valuer with the approved valuer to be fairly early on in that decision to IPO. In addition, it's possible that when an asset owner with, let's say they've got a larger asset portfolio than a single asset, might be trying to contemplate what assets are eligible for coming to market. And at that stage, the asset owner might instruct a valuation for their own internal purposes to determine which assets might be eligible for coming to market. And when I talk about eligible, one of the criteria that we have in our rules is that the assets must be valued at least £50 million. So there might be a role for an approved valuer or a valuer earlier on in that process, at the point that they are instructed to undertake a formal RICS Red Book valuation for the purposes of coming to market. That would be instructed potentially by the asset owner, but as I've mentioned earlier, it is ultimately for the benefit of the issuer, which will be the company holding the asset at the point of IPO.
Okay, very good, thank you. So I think really the earlier the better is probably in the process what you have sort of said.
Yes.
I can quite imagine that a number of asset owners would already have a valuer which they are either retained or have been used in the past for looking at either portfolios or individual assets. Now, if this asset owner already has a value, but they're not an IPSX approved valuer, are they still able to carry out the valuation for the prospectus that's needed and for the inclusion into the exchange or not?
That's a good question, and it's a question that I have had asked of me before. The valuer is required to be independent, and there are requirements under the RICS framework to manage conflicts of interest, which would look to factors such as how they maintain their independence. And in our rules, we anticipate that an issuer would rotate their valuer every 5 years. But we're not requiring at the point of that 5 year relationship commences, if you like, from the point of IPO. So if an issuer or indeed an asset owner has an existing relationship with a valuer and has had so for some time, that would not prevent them using the same valuer to help them prepare for the IPO.
Okay, thank you very much. That's pretty clear. And last question that we've got, why is it that IPSX has approved valuers when no other exchange seems to have these?
Another good question. So as I mentioned, when an issuer comes to a regulated market in the UK and they hold a property portfolio, the prospectus rules also require the preparation of of an RICS compliant valuation. And other exchanges don't. You're right. Other exchanges don't approve valuers as part of their membership. The reason that we've taken a different approach is because our exchange is dedicated to real estate, to commercial real estate. And so the valuation forms a key part of the asset valuation forms a key part of the pricing, if you like, of the issuer. And for that reason, we've taken the view that we need to ensure that the valuations are done to a standard that is appropriate, hence the reliance on RICS, but also that they include very specific information that we want to see covered to help investors make that decision. And we also want to ensure that the valuers who will be supporting our issuers have the right experience and background to enable them to undertake valuations for the types of companies coming to our market. So for those two reasons, one, the ensuring competence and experience, and the other to ensure that the evaluations once produced meet our standards, we have decided that it's appropriate to directly approve and have within our supervisory regime the IPSX approved valuers. As I've mentioned earlier, we're not looking to reinvent a wheel, and we're relying on the RICS standards both for the competence of the members and then also for their standards in conducting the valuations. And
as you've quite properly described, there's a very clear process there for valuers who may be interested in becoming approved valuers to download the membership forms and to get in touch with the team here and to follow the process as to how to do that.
Yes.
Very good, thank you. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. And first of all, may I thank all of you for joining us and for your questions this morning. May I also thank Lisa Walker, our Head of Market Regulation here at IPSX, for taking us through what is clearly a very important part of the function and process of getting ready for an IPO. This webinar will be available up on our website shortly at ipsx.com alongside all our other webinars and podcasts. But may I just leave you now by saying that look out for our next webinar, which will again be with Lisa and with our Senior Business Analyst Caroline Granger on the 15th of August, where we are going to be covering a guide to trading on IPSX. So thank you very much indeed for joining us today, and we look forward to joining with you again soon.